Hey everybody, Mrs. McKenna here, and I'm going to give you some information about the novel Grendel by John Gardner. You just watched a video about Beowulf. It's kind of like a summarized, shortened version of the epic, but it has the same basic plot elements in that. And you'll be studying the novel Grendel next. Instead of reading the novel, you will be using an audiobook version of it. So you'll be listening to the novel rather than reading it because unfortunately, we don't have the paper copies that we can give to you. So before you start reading it, I thought I'd give you some background information to it. Now, the novel Grendel does come from the epic Beowulf, and again, you just watched the cartoon of it. John Gardner wrote it in 1971. It is considered fantasy. It is narrated by the monster Grendel. So this story, the novel Grendel, is Grendel's point of view. It's his perspective. It's his story. Okay, Beowulf is the main character of Beowulf. Grendel is the main character of Grendel. And we're going to see that he has an uncanny ability to kind of look beyond himself and analyze other characters. So he's going to be analyzing the king, the queen, the dragon, Beowulf. He's going to be looking at all these different characters. Now, much of it is written in the present tense. Grendel is telling us his story, but there are multiple flashback sequences. So we're going to see Grendel kind of flashing back to when he was a baby or when he was a little child Grendel. So we have to keep that in mind, okay? And the title, obviously, like I mentioned, it comes from the antagonist of the story, okay? The antagonist of Beowulf is Grendel, and he is the protagonist in this novel. So it's kind of neat to see the different perspectives there. But he is basically known for wreaking havoc in medieval Denmark in the story of Beowulf. So we're going to see kind of a modernized retelling, a modern perspective of Grendel, and see what his version is, what his story is. Some of the characters who show up in this story are the same exact characters who show up in Beowulf. We've got Grendel the monster. We've got Hrothgar the king. We have Grendel's mother who cannot speak in this story. And then we have the dragon. We're also going to see some other characters who show up as well, and I'll get into them later. Some of the symbols that are in here, the cave and the mead hall. The cave is Grendel's home, but it's not really homey. It's not something that we would consider, warm and cozy and someplace we like to go. It's very isolating. There are others who live there with him, but it's not a happy place. Then we have the mead hall where all the humans hang out and it's happy and jovial and everybody gets along. But unfortunately, Grendel is never invited there, sadly. He does stand outside the window and listen in, though, which makes it a little bit sad. Some of the themes that show up in this: isolation. Grendel is very isolated. Fate versus free will. Is Grendel fated to be a monster? Does he have free will to make his own choices? And that kind of brings us back to our discussions from Oedipus the King. Monsters and humans, like I mentioned, the monsters may not act so monstrous. The humans may not act so humane. In fact, we see the humans do act monstrous on several occasions. And then this idea of storytelling, telling the story, telling the perspective. We've been studying a lot of different versions of storytelling throughout this whole school year. This is another version, but we're looking at it from a different perspective. A little bit more about this story, okay? What does it mean to be a monster, okay? Grendel is very isolated, okay? It's kind of understandable how he becomes monstrous because nobody wants him. He doesn't fit in. He's treated very, very terribly. We have this, again, this idea of fate versus free will. We don't know if Grendel has any control over his own fate. Or does he have any free will? So is he fated to be a monster and do these terrible things, or is he doing these terrible things out of his own choice? That's something that we have to think about. And then, like I mentioned, monsters and humans. Humans can act monstrous, and monsters can act humane. There's a lot of go between. It's not just one way or the other. There's a lot of gray area where they could be different things. Some of the main characters we see in this, we see the dragon, just like the dragon that shows up in the story of Beowulf. We also see a dragon in here. He teaches Grendel. He's greedy. He's cold. Grendel thinks he's his friend, but he's not. We see our monster Grendel. Okay, he's searching for meaning. He can talk. He can think. He can feel. We also see Grendel's mother. She cannot speak, but we see that she does have feelings as well in this story. Hrothgar is the king of the Danes, and it's his kingdom that Grendel has been bothering and attacking and killing for the past 10 years. Okay, he is basically Grendel's adversary, his enemy. We see Rotholf, that's Hrothgar's nephew, and Rotholf, he wants to be king. He wants to inherit the throne from his uncle Hrothgar. But Hrothgar has a couple of sons and he wants his kingdom to go to them. So there's a lot of tension there. We see Wealhtheow. She is married to Hrothgar and they have two sons together. She wants to protect her sons. She loves her sons, but she misses her home very badly. And we're going to see about her wedding to Hrothgar and what happened there. We're also going to see that Grendel seems to have a crush on Wealhtheow. We see the Shaper. He can be considered a bard. Okay, he's telling us the story, he's singing the story, and Grendel loves and respects him. Grendel doesn't know him, but he listens to these stories and he respects him quite a bit. And then we see Unferth. Okay, Unferth wants to be a hero. He wants to be a Danish hero. He wants to kill Grendel, get all the glory for it, but Grendel will not let that happen. He absolutely will not let that happen. And we see a part where Grendel actually mocks Unferth and throws apples at him and stuff like that. All right, we've got some motifs that show up in here. Okay, we've got the zodiac. There's 12 different chapters in this book, and they each represent the zodiac. Okay, so you might have the zodiac of Pisces, which is the fish. That's my zodiac. So you will see there's fish that show up in that chapter. So they're a little hard to find sometimes, but there is a different zodiac sign in every single chapter. The seasons also show up in this story. It's very cyclical, and Grendel goes through the seasons and he might feel certain emotions at different seasons, but the seasons show up all the time. And then this idea of machinery, okay, mindless behavior of humans, of animals, Grendel equates that to machinery. They're like machines or robots just going through the motions. And Grendel doesn't really respect that. He doesn't see the emotionality behind it, okay? Now, John Gardner wrote this, and he's an American author, okay? And the story of Beowulf was one of the first, it's one of the oldest documents we have that was written in English. It was written in Old English, but it was one of the first documents we have in English, one of the first stories written in English that we have documentation of. But it isn't set in England, okay? It's set over in Denmark. And the story was brought over to England and then written down. John Gardner studied the story of Beowulf. He enjoyed it. And then he said, you know what? I'm going to write the story from Grendel's point of view. So he is taking the oldest piece of literature, the oldest piece of writing that we have in the English language, not our modern English, but in Old English, and he wrote this story around it. Here's a great quote. I was Grendel, ruiner of mead halls, wrecker of kings, but also as never before, I was alone. So I have to admit, I do feel a little bad for Grendel when we read his story, okay? Some of the themes that show up, the whole idea of isolation, Grendel is very alone. He's not physically alone. He's got his mom. He's got different like monsters around him, but he has no friends and he feels very, very alone. Fate versus free will, like I mentioned earlier, is Grendel fated to be a monster and do these terrible things, or is he making a choice? Is it his free will to do it? So that's something to think about as you listen to this story. Again, monsters and humans. Humans can act humane and monsters can act humane. Okay, so sometimes the monsters aren't all that bad and sometimes the humans aren't all that good. Next, we have storytelling, and we're seeing this is a story being told, okay, but it's from a different perspective. The antagonist in the story of Beowulf is now the protagonist in Grendel. Some of the symbols that show up here, like I mentioned, the cave and the mead hall. The cave is very isolating and very alone and dark and scary. The mead hall is more open and light because of the fires, with people there laughing. The Shaper comes and tells stories, and everybody gets along for the most part, and they're friendly. Grendel wants to be in that mead hall. He wants to have a friend. He sits outside and listens to the Shaper tell stories. He hears the people laughing and joking and getting along with each other. And again, that adds to his isolation. Like I mentioned, the seasons show up. We're going to see repetitive mention of the different seasons. Machinery, again, we have Grendel getting frustrated. He thinks humans and animals, even his mom, they act very machine-like and they don't really interact with their emotions. And he doesn't really know how to handle that. And then we've got the zodiac, okay? There's a different zodiac that shows up in every single chapter, okay? The Aries is in chapter 1. Taurus is in chapter 2. The goat in chapter 10. Um, We've got Libra, the balance in chapter 7. There's a different one for every single chapter. Okay, so we'll see those. And then trees show up as well. Okay, their imagery. We're going to see little baby Grendel get stuck in a tree. Okay, so you'll see a lot of these different motifs that show up in the novel Grendel. So this gives you a little bit of background information to the novel Grendel. You're going to start reading this, or not reading, rather listening to this novel, but keep some of these ideas in mind as you listen. The humans are not always humane. The monsters aren't always monstrous. We see the seasons. We see people not taking care of each other, maybe monsters trying to take care of each other. So we're going to see a lot of different ideas. So you're going to listen to this at the very end. You're going to do some analysis and you'll have a couple of little things sprinkled in. So I hope you enjoy this novel. It's going to be a little different doing an audiobook of it, but hey, we're going to go with the flow and I hope you guys enjoy it. But everybody, take care, be well, and I hope you enjoy this book. All right, bye.